Hello everyone and welcome to Season 13, Episode 8 of the Ubuntu podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Martin's network. We're going to have some command line love and we'll go over all of your feedback. Joining me this week are the usual suspects. Alan Pope.
Hello Mark, how are you?
I am well, how are you?
I am tickety-boo.
Good, now we got the pleasantries out of the way. Martin.
Friend.
I was just about to say, hello, friend.
How are you, Martin?
I'm very well, thank you. I'm on holiday.
Oh, well, all right for some.
Yes.
Where are you on holiday?
At home.
Oh.
In the house.
Oh, well.
I haven't been out of the house for 3.5 weeks.
But you are not working.
But I'm not working. This is
You're
true.
giving yourself a break after a successful release, no doubt.
Yes, that's the general idea, yes.
Excellent. Well, so what have you been doing while you've been on holiday?
I've been live streaming on YouTube.
Live streaming? What have you been live streaming?
I've been doing Let's Code live streams.
And what have you been coding?
Well, at the moment, I'm working on a utility that you can use on Ubuntu server for the Raspberry Pi to turn it into Ubuntu desktop for the Raspberry Pi.
I see. And what's the advantage of doing that over just installing Ubuntu desktop on the Raspberry Pi?
Well, there isn't an Ubuntu desktop image for the Raspberry Pi, but there is first-class support for the Raspberry Pi in Ubuntu. So it's a small matter of somebody that knows sort of what the difference is between server and desktop are to write something that can automatically turn a server into a desktop. And that's what I've been working on.
Is it not just apt install Ubuntu desktop?
No.
Oh. I mean, that's what I would have tried. If someone said, hey, can you turn this server install into a desktop? I'd go, yeah, apt install Ubuntu desktop. I might have put a little carry on the end or use task cell or something like that. Is there more to it than that?
That'll get you 8/10 of the way there. I mean, when I did the first live stream, that was basically the MVP. There's an additional package which enables Bluetooth that needs to be installed. Mm-hmm. And then there's stuff like, so the server image has Cloud Init, and Cloud Init wants to use NetPlan for the network management. So that means Network Manager is sat there dead doing nothing. So you have to poke around and disable the Cloud Init network config and then tell NetPlan, you're not responsible anymore. Network Manager is. So there's a few little, tweaks like that. And then there's a few things you can do with the different desktop environments to just tune them a little bit to, take advantage of the hardware they're on. So I'm sort of well down that road now, but what I've really enjoyed is a sort of virtual pair programming where you have like 30 people spotting all your typos and mistakes and what have you, and then people coming up with grand ideas like, we should have a CI job that automatically runs everything through shell check. And then whilst you're talking about it, a pull request arrives that does that very thing. And then you find out your program doesn't shell check validate. So everyone's like, right, Martin, you should make this pass shell check. So you've got Stuart Langridge standing on the sidelines, cheering everyone along, watching me scratch my head and struggle as I'm trying to work out what these esoteric shell check issues. But yes, it's been jolly good fun. And if that sounds like jolly good fun to you, you can find out more at youtube.com/Wimpy's World.
Excellent. And with that, let's get on with the show. So, Martin, you've been making some changes to your home network, haven't you?
I have. I've had upgrades.
Oh, tell us about your upgrades.
Okay, so we did have a 40 megabit down, 8 megabit up fiber to the cabinet service, which was from Zen, so going over the BT OpenReach stuff. But we now have a 500 megabit down, 35 megabit up fiber to the premises from Virgin Media.
Wow. I mean, your previous connection, some would argue, is quite good.
Yeah, it was okay. We were struggling. I've got into live streaming recently, and we were struggling with that because it meant that when I was doing that, there was a Netflix embargo in the house, which was a bit sad for everyone else. So it now means everyone can go about their business, and I can entertain myself as well.
So did this cause some issues with, because obviously your internal network might require some upgrades as you go over the 100 megabit down internet speed.
10 megabits enough for everyone, surely.
So yes, what I learned is that in addition to having a Wi-Fi router, which gives us the house network, we also have a number of power line adapters around the house, which enable devices which have got Ethernet only to connect to the Plex server in the office, so all over power line, and also some other devices to get out over the power line to the internet because it connects to the router. So power line's a way of connecting wired devices. So I quickly identified they were not good enough for the job.
Which ones did you have? Did you have the Devolo or the TP-Link? Those seem to be the most popular ones.
Yeah, so I had been using TP-Link AV 1200 powerline devices, and they've been able to stream from the Plex server in the office to the home cinema downstairs, full HD and 4K video just fine. I've never measured the performance, but it worked just fine. But from my office on this workstation, I was only getting about 120 megabits download to the internet with the new fancy stuff. So that immediately made me very sad.
So, sorry, you had the TP-Link 1200s. And
yes.
How many of those did you have scattered around the house?
4.
That's the same I've got. I think I've got the same devices. Some of them have got one port in the top. Some of them have got 3 ports in the top. And I've got stuff like the set-top TV box, and my Steam Link is connected to it and stuff like that. And they seem okay. I've never identified them as being a problem. But
no.
You think yours were?
Well, here starts a story. So I went and did some research, and I found that Devolo, who you mentioned, have got these thing called Magic 2s, and they do Wi-Fi and LAN, and they have the advertised AV 2400. So therefore, twice as fast as my AV 1200 TP links. So I jolly well bought some of those. And I then decide when they arrived, I plugged it into my workstation upstairs and got everything connected, and the network performance was not as good. So here is where the story starts. So I used a utility called iPerf3, which you'll find in the archive, and it takes active measurements of the maximum achievable bandwidth on IP networks. So I had the workstation upstairs running iPerf3 in daemon mode, and then I was able to take a laptop downstairs. Both have gigabit Ethernet and fast processors, and then measure the performance between the two of them over the power line.
So this is like using something like speedtest.net, but within your internal network.
Indeed, exactly like that, yes.
What's the difference between, I always just use iPerf-S on one machine and iPerf-C on the other. What's the difference between iPerf and iPerf3?
iPerf3 is just the one that I read about as being the current version implementation, but it had one neat feature, which is I was running it as a daemon up here, but from the client downstairs, you can tell the daemon to either send or receive. So you can do the two-way test without actually having to manipulate both ends of the connection. So what I learned using iPerf3 is the Devolo Magic 2s were giving me 96 megabits per second between the two rooms. So I plugged in my old TP-Link AV 1200s and discovered they were getting 131 megabits per second between the two rooms. And I tried absolutely everything to get the Devolos to perform, and they simply didn't. They are rubbish.
You've done all the old, turn on or off the encryption, do the firmware updates, all that nonsense, plug them directly into a socket, not into a 4-way, all that stuff.
So all of those things, which in itself meant that I had to use NetDiscover to find the IP addresses of the Devolo powerline adapters in order to do the firmware updates and manipulate the configuration. Because although they have a utility for Ubuntu to detect these things. First of all, after I did get it running, which is a story in itself, it didn't detect anything on the network, so I couldn't configure them. So I used NetDiscover to find the IP addresses and then connected to the web server on each of them to update and configure them. I put 2 of them on a perfectly clean circuit right next on adjacent sockets. So about 4 meters between the sockets, and measuring there, so in perfect conditions, I got 270 megabits per second. So in my opinion, that's like the best case that you can get out of those, but way off the 500 that I'm trying to achieve. So they went back. And I thought, well, I wonder if TP-Link have TP-Link AV2000s. So I thought, I wonder if they're any good. So I got some of those, and they measure 189 megabits per second between that connection. So it's an improvement, but not, what I'm looking for. But nevertheless, I've decided to keep those because it does mean that there's just a better connection around the house over the power line now. If you wanted a really good connection, would it not be worth just running an Ethernet cable between these 2 rooms? Yes, this is an option, but of course, that is quite a distance that I need to cover, and I don't actually have any Ethernet cable for that, and I didn't fancy getting up ladders and running cables from the upstairs room round the side of the house down round to the front and all the rest of it. So I'm being lazy. I've got a nice long drill bit you can borrow.
And more importantly, it wouldn't have given us a segment for the show.
Right. So
if you'd just run a cable.
So anyway, the whole power line thing, they're super useful, but they're kind of limited in what you can do. In the tests that I've done, that sort of maximum that I could get was around 270 megabits, but over a distance that's really not all that useful. And in typical use, room to room, I'm seeing about 120 to 150 megabits, which is fine for streaming from a Roku device from the server upstairs. It works fine for that. But for my internet, not so great.
I've seen lots of people talk about how powerline devices are really adversely affected by the wiring. And all it takes is for a bit of ropey wiring or for a noisy iPhone charger or something to be on the same circuit. And that's enough to like just completely ruin your bandwidth.
So it's worth pointing out that when I did these speed tests, it was at 2 a.m. in the morning, and I was deliberately doing it in a time when I could unplug everything I could to try and identify where problems were. So it's some distance. I imagine there's probably about 30 meters of electrical cabling between the two, maybe more than that, between the 2 points. But nevertheless, so I decided I'll turn my attention to Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi's got fast recently. So I bought a new Wi-Fi router. I had been using a TP-Link VR2600 that I've had for, 4 or 5 years maybe. And I have bought a new TP-Link Archer AX6000.
That sounds impressive. It's got an X in the name.
It looks like one of those robots that Boston Dynamics would set upon you, when the robot overlords come. It's an impressive looking bit of kit, and I really got that because it's just faster. And I did wonder if it would help the performance of the LAN, but it didn't. And it supports Wi-Fi 6, so. Everything from here onwards, it wouldn't have actually mattered whether I'd replaced the router or not, but I put a new router in because I wanted an upgrade.
Didn't you get a router with the change in internet connection? Or are you talking of your own router in front of the internet connection?
I'm talking about my router in front of that. So yes, there is a new bit of kit in the network, which is a Hytron sort of router stroke modem from Virgin Media that connects to the fiber network and provides that point of presence. But my home router is still required to actually create the Wi-Fi network and the LAN and the VLANs and all of that stuff. So I then set about using Wi-Fi, and that also made me sad. So the first thing I did was use an app in from the Google Play Store on my phone called Wi-Fi Analyzer, to see what channels are in use by my neighbours in order to find the optimal channel for my networks, my 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz network, so that I'm not competing for the same frequencies that they are.
I've used the same tool quite a bit. I always use that to like scan the network, but I just have my wireless network set on auto and just let it figure it out itself. I'm sure I could probably do better, but I probably should, because it's quite dense with Wi-Fi networks around here. I don't know if it is around your way, but
yeah. I mean, I did discover I've only got one device on the 2.4 gigahertz network. So I don't technically need that. I could just replace that device with something else. But the other thing that this reminded me about is channel widths. So you can, on the TP-Link routers, you can configure the channel widths of the networks, either 20 to 40 megahertz on the 2.4 gigahertz networks, or 20 to 160 megahertz on the 5 gigahertz networks. Now, what all that means is the wider the channel width, the more data you can transmit. So wider, faster, basically. And I played with that and certainly did get some improvement in Wi-Fi performance. And I went to the max with the 5 gigahertz and chose 160 megahertz channels. I've had to back that off to 80 because it turns out that some of those new tablets and things that I spoke about recently, they don't support 160 megahertz, and they couldn't see the wireless at all at that point. So, use 160 megahertz with Wi-Fi 6 or 5 gigahertz networks with caution.
Was that basically it for replacing all the hardware? Like once you've got your decent power line, decent wireless, you're done, right?
Well, you'd think so. But of course, at this point, I've now got my new wireless in and I'm wanting to use Wi-Fi on my workstation to try and get more of that high-speed connection than the power line can deliver. So my workstation has built-in Wi-Fi, and it's got sockets for an antenna, but there wasn't an antenna connected. Yeah. So I ran that up and I was getting 11 megabits. So I rummaged around.
You put like a coat hanger in the back of it or something?
Right. Well, I remembered that it did come with an antenna in the box. So I rummaged around and found that, got that connected, and then I'm getting 220 megabits.
Nice. That's a bit of an improvement.
I'm much happier with that.
Turns out putting an antenna on a radio turns out really helps.
Yeah. And then I thought, what if I get a bigger antenna? Can I make it go faster? So I bought a higher gain antenna from Amazon and connected that up, and then used a tool called WaveMon, which is an N-Curses-based monitoring application for wireless networks. And it gives you all the metrics. And the way I was able to use that is it tells you the signal strength and the speed that it's connecting to the access point, and the quality and the signal to noise ratio, just everything, all with nice graphs and stuff. It's so up your street, Alan. Anyway, using that and the new antenna, I could objectively arrange the antenna poles and position them in the room to get the best signal possible. And now my wireless connection is 330 megabits per second by doing that. So that's quite an improvement.
Does your new wireless router tell you what it theoretically thinks it can do in terms of bandwidth over the wireless network? And how does it compare to that?
It tells me that it can do 5 gigabits.
Okay, wow.
But that's multiple antennas talking to multiple devices at the same time.
I see, right.
But each individual stream should be about a gigabit, but that's only if you're using the new 802.11ax or Wi-Fi 6, which I am not, because my card in my workstation is the AC standard. So, looking in WaveMon, it tells you what the actual connection frequencies are, and it's getting close to the line limit of what those can deliver. So I'm pretty happy with that 330 megabits per second over Wi-Fi.
Is there anything left that you need to do, or that you would do that you need to tweak? Is that everything?
On the wireless side of things, that I'm pretty happy with that. I mean, the latency over the local area network over Wi-Fi from up here is way, way lower than over Powerline. So just pinging from up here to the router downstairs is 0.8 milliseconds over Wi-Fi, and over Powerline it's about 4 milliseconds. So that's interesting, because one of the reasons why I wanted to keep the Powerline is because I mentioned I'm doing live streaming, and I felt that would be a more reliable, stable way to have that upstream connection. But over Powerline and Wi-Fi, I'm getting a nice solid 35 megabits constantly. So I can just switch between Wi-Fi and wired on my workstation. When I want to stream, I can switch to wired. I get lower download, but I've got a stable wired upstream connection. But I'm going to experiment with streaming over Wi-Fi because objectively it is faster, around the house. And I did consider getting a mesh network, but they're super, super expensive. But I did learn that there was another problem that I didn't realize I had. So, my new router, you can configure the MTU size. The MTU is like the maximum packet size that you'll send out to the internet. And I remembered from when I used to sort of do this stuff, there's a utility called TracePath, which will look at your route to a destination and analyze the MTU changes as it goes along. And when I ran that, I found out that the Virgin network was changing the MTU size of my packets in hops in its network that were different, obviously, from how my router was configured. And that's causing packet fragmentation. So by using TracePath, you can see what your ISP's MTU is, and then you set your router's MTU to be the same. And that prevents the packet fragmentation. But then what you also need to do is change the MTU of all of your devices on the network, or maybe all the devices that you care about. And so in order to do that on my workstation, which has a static IP address, I used NMTUI, which is the N-curses interface for Network Manager.
It's a firm favorite, NM2E. I do like it.
Yeah. What's interesting is that exposes MTU configuration, but the desktop graphical UI doesn't have MTU for wireless connections, but does for Ethernet.
Well, there's a bonus command line love.
It's full of command line loves in here. There's a whole load of them. We'll have to write up a list, and
I'll put links in the show notes to those utilities that I've found useful. And the other things that are useful for MTU is if you're using DNS mask on your network, DNS mask can set the MTU size for clients that are getting IP addresses from it. So you can do that to hit lots of devices. And NetPlan, I've set the MTU size on the server there as well. So I now have everything on the network all correctly optimized.
Cool. Well, I've certainly learned a lot.
Me too.
I've been having some issues with my network. So there's now some things which I'm going to go away and try. And if any listeners have any other top tips for optimizing your home network, you can email us to show@ubuntupodcast.org. And now it's time for some command line love. And this week's command line love is S.
I don't think that's how we normally pronounce commands.
But sorry.
It's SS. And I found this out from the Ubuntu Podcast Telegram channel, which you can find at ubuntupodcast.org/telegram. When I was chatting about my AdGuard appliance the other day, we were talking about binding to ports and IP addresses and stuff. And someone said, just run sudo ss-tlnp. And I thought, what is this? I've never heard of this command before. And it lists the sockets It's the name of the application is Another Utility to Investigate Sockets, and it lists all the network sockets that are open, and so you can see which ports are in use. So, for example, if you have just installed a system and it's got some kind of web admin tool and you don't know what port the web admin tool is running on, you can use SS to discover this. And this was a learning process for me because I'd never heard of SS. I've used Netstat, before. I've never used SS.
So do you run this on whatever machine on your network, or do you run it on the thing which has the service on?
I ran it on the thing that had the service on. It's just like running Netstat on a local machine to find out what's running here. What ports has this thing got open? And I discovered all the ports that were open, which were not many. Like the web admin tool, SSH, and the DNS server, and that was it.
This is gold. I hate grappling with Netstat to try and find the correct incantation to tell me what it is I want to know. This is a million times better. I love it. This is the best one of these we've had for quite some time, since NetDiscover, in fact.
We love getting your feedback. If you've got a comment about something you hear on the show, why don't you drop us an email on show@ubuntupodcast.org.
And now it's time for all of your wonderful feedback. And to start us off from Twitter, Wendybug tweeted @Ubuntu Podcast.
The new Ubuntu release has been really impressive. Until this GNOME bug with Wacom tablets, I guess I will now be heading to another version. It is a serious issue for those doing graphic work.
Well, interestingly, one of the reasons given for Ubuntu Studio moving to Plasma for its desktop was that Plasma has really good support for Wacom graphics tablets. And obviously one of the main use cases for Ubuntu Studio is people doing creation of stuff like graphics. So it might be worth giving that a go.
Yeah. Well, software has bugs. It's unfortunate that you've discovered a bug that affects you.
Next, Joan Cyphersheep tweeted about Linux phones.
I have been using my Ubuntu Touch device about 4 years now. The only things I need: GPS, music and podcast player, browser, email client, Telegram, and interactive fiction player. Like Ubuntu, it's designed the way I wanted it. That's follow on from the conversation we had a little while ago about the future of phones and the feature set that people need in their devices. I think we asked for, which is why Joan wrote in.
And Chris Bickhouse tweeted,
I took the beta test challenge, which you suggested during the 1910 cycle, was hit with a relatively minor but annoying bug where the functionality of numlock was reversed. Yay, I got to contribute.
Wow.
That's a curious one.
It is. I mean, I've seen where holding down sometimes a key makes the LED inconsistent with the state of things, and you end up with the state inverted. I've seen that with the microphone and the speaker buttons, but I've never seen it with numlock. I don't actually have a numlock button on any of my keyboards because they're ThinkPad keyboards and they don't have them.
Yes, I don't have a 10 key on this keyboard, so I don't even know why I'm looking for a numlock because it would serve no useful purpose.
The pause you just heard, listeners, was Martin peering at his keyboards.
That was the egg timer spinning around in my brain as I was looking at this, trying to work out what I was looking at.
Russell Dickinson tweeted,
Hearing you say GitHub have won the code hosting war makes me sad and upset. As advocates for open source, why no mention of GitLab?
Launchpad.
Because
yeah, I mean,
because GitLab hasn't won the code hosting war.
Well, a lot of open source projects are on GitLab. That's true. When I say a lot, GNOME, KDE are moving there, I believe, and a whole bunch of application developers have their stuff on GitLab. But a tremendously higher number have them on GitHub. This is just a fact of life. And it is something I've resigned to after everyone decided Launchpad was not what they needed. And yes, I know Launchpad Bazaar, not Git, and Launchpad initially was not open source, but now is. And I'm not bitter about the fact that Launchpad is open source and everyone uses GitHub. which is not open source. Yes, I am secretly, not secretly, very bitter about that, but that's fine. GitLab is great. Also, what was good are all the other options for self-hosting your own Git repo, like Gitgogs and Git and there's loads of them. There's loads of possibilities for you to host somewhere other than GitHub. But I still think it's true that they won the code hosting war.
James Swift emailed to show@ubuntupodcast.org.
I just upgraded to 2004 from 1910 on my Acer tablet laptop detachable. Is that called a 2-in-1 these days?
I think so.
And sadly, the on-screen keyboard support when in tablet mode is now pretty broken. I'll be submitting bugs shortly, but it made me wonder what the bigger picture is for tablet support from Ubuntu. Is it an active consideration when planning for future releases?
We should talk to someone in charge of the desktop team about that.
Who could we possibly get on to talk about that?
I know this fella called Will. Right. This is something that we are going to be actively working on in the upcoming cycle. And predominantly that's because we have OEM partners who want to ship more 2-in-1 devices pre-installed with Ubuntu. And as you highlight, it is in some places less than stellar right now. So we will be putting some effort into making it good.
Cool. Yeah, it's good to actually hear that OEMs are interested in shipping that sort of device with Ubuntu on.
Yes.
Ken Fallon emailed.
I know that the Canonical employees are on the receiving end of bug reports. I would like you to share your thoughts on this KDE bug, which was reported in 2015. Not so much about fixing the issue itself, but what has gone wrong in the bug reporting here. There seems to be very little feedback from the developers, and the users do not seem to be supplying any technical insight to support a fix. I would like to know what you think can be done to improve the process of bug reporting. Okay, so if you want to follow along at home, the bug number is on KDE's bug tracker, and it's 356225. That's 356225.
And we'll have a link in the show notes.
And yes, that bug was indeed reported in December 2015, and it has 163 people on the CC list. So that's the number of people who are subscribed to this bug. Not all of those are affected by this because some of them just would have commented, but a lot of people are affected by this. And there are a fair number of duplicates of this bug where other people are reporting the same issue. And basically, the issue is around the performance of the way Plasma works on multi-screen environments. Specifically, when you add a screen, things can freak out a little bit and things move around unexpectedly or disappear unexpectedly as you add or remove a display. And this is tricky because I've also seen issues with multi-screen environments, not necessarily on Plasma, on every Linux desktop. Their multi-screen workflow has broken in some way for me at some point, and I think most people have found that.
Even Unity.
Yeah, totally on Unity as well. Oh God, you're triggering me now thinking of the. Oh no, stop it. So there's a lot of comments on this bug, and I think the short summary is there's a lot of talking past each other and a lot of people bringing up similar but maybe not exactly the same thing, which is causing a lot of confusion in the conversations. And it's very hard to pick out a very specific reproducible thing because there's lots of different people with lots of different problems. It seems like there's a wider problem, and it might be that the Plasma developers need to sit down and have a multi-monitor sprint or something, get a bunch of developers who know this area, whether it's X or Wayland or Kwin or whichever components it is, in an office with a bunch of laptops and a bunch of displays and projectors and start plugging and unplugging and reproduce all this stuff and trace it all. But the problem is that's very time consuming and somewhat expensive and very difficult to get people in the same place. And this just falls down to the same problem with all open source projects, is not enough developers working on these complex core components. It's just hard.
You also have to have developers that have the hardware that's affected as well, which is also tricky when we come to multiple monitors.
Yeah, and also even it's not even enough to have the right hardware. For multi-monitor bugs, you even have to have the displays physically arranged the same way as the person who reported the bug.
Right.
I had a bug that we reported recently, but it only manifests itself if you've got one display above the other, not if you've got one side by side. The bug just doesn't appear if the monitors are side by side. And so if someone reports a bug and says, I've got 2 monitors and this happens, and you try and reproduce it, if you don't have them in exactly the same orientation in the settings, you wouldn't see it. And so it's always difficult to debug and diagnose a bug if you just can't reproduce it. You just can't make the thing happen that the user is reporting. And I still maintain this is down to not enough people. And that's not a slight on KDE. It's all open source projects have this problem.
And plenty of closed source projects for that matter.
Well, yeah, fair.
Next up, Avinash Gunnassi emailed.
I love your show and I love listening to you all. I have one quick question. I currently use Ubuntu 18.04 LTS and don't plan to move to 20.04 until next year. Will any improvements done on 20.04 be backported to 18.04? Not really, but kind of is the answer. So in terms of the desktop itself, a lot of the fixes and performance improvements that could reasonably be backported have already been backported to 18.04. So don't expect any significant new features or a new version of GNOME or anything like that. If there are significant bugs to be fixed, then they'll obviously get addressed because, that 18.04 release has got another 8 years on the clock before, it's potentially out of support with ESM. But the one thing that you will be getting soon is a new hardware enablement stack, which will come with a new kernel, and that will include WireGuard, for example. So you will have access to WireGuard on 18.04 around the July timeframe, something like that.
Cool. And finally, it's that moment you've all been listening for. David Sigwin has written into Alan's ThinkPad Corner.
Thank you, David, for keeping the dream alive. He says, I have a few older ThinkPads running Ubuntu, which tend to run quite hot. Wanting to preserve this hardware, I wrote a service to better control the fan speed based on CPU temperature, which I've submitted to GitHub, and we'll put a link to his GitHub repo in the show notes. He says, my rationale is that the default fan behavior is not aggressive enough, especially for the older generation machines. On my T420, for example, temperatures are 10 degrees cooler on average when running his TP Auto Fan software. The fan noise is quite a bit louder under load, but the temperature never exceeds 80 degrees C, which is all I really care about. An alternative solution would be to replace the thermal compound, but the T420 and T430 models would need to be completely disassembled, which may be beyond the ability of most people. To that end, I think making the fan more aggressive in software is a reasonable trade-off. P.S. I work at a PC refurbishing company and I have thousands of ThinkPads. I firmly believe they are the best laptops on the market. Well done, David. You are absolutely right. And thank you very much for your input to ThinkPad Corner.
I love that we have a ThinkPad Corner now. Mm-hmm. Please keep the emails to ThinkPad Corner coming in to show@ubuntupodcast.org.
And that's all for episode 8 of season 13. Thank you all very much for listening. Next week, we'll be discussing some community news, goings on, maybe some events. If there's some events happening which you'd like us to talk about, please let us know. You can email show@ubuntupodcast.org. You can send us messages in our Telegram channel at ubuntupodcast.org/telegram, or you could tweet us at ubuntupodcast on Twitter. Until then, stay safe, remain indoors, and see you next time.